Tourism industry is one of the biggest industry in the world and a major contributor of the economics of a country. It is one of the reasons why developed countries are economically successful. Tourism brings with it huge economic potential for a destination that wishes to develop their tourism industry. Employment, currency exchange, imports, and taxes are just a few of the ways that tourism can bring money into a destination. There are a number of reasons for this growth, including improvements in technology, increases in disposable income, the growth of budget airlines, and consumers' desires to travel farther to new destinations and more often. Here are a few facts about the economic importance of the tourism industry globally. The tourism economy represents 5% of world GDP. Next is the tourism contributes to 6 to 7% of total employment. International tourism ranks fourth after fuels, chemicals, and automotive products in global exports. The tourism industry is valued at US $1 trillion a year. The tourism accounts for 30% of the world's exports of commercial services. Tourism accounts for 6% of total exports. 1.4 billion international tourists were recorded in 2018 by the United Nations World Tourism Organization. In over 150 countries, tourism is one of 5 top export earners. And lastly, tourism is the main source of foreign exchange for one-third of developing countries and one-half of less economically developed countries.
What do we mean by economic impact? The economic impact refers to the impact that tourism has on the money that is available in the country, both at the local and national stage. So here are some of the examples of economic impact of tourism in the world. So the first one is the foreign exchange revenue. So talking about the world's economy, it is about international tourism where the place of origin is in another country. And of course, in another country, it's a different currency. And therefore, there is an increased influx of foreign exchange revenue. When there is increased international tourism in a given locality. Next is the tax revenue. When a certain community, locality, or country has a booming tourism industry, of course, more income will be generated for organizations and enterprises that are involved in that tourism industry. And as we know, of course, organizations and enterprises will pay a certain portion of that income to the government through the form of tax. And if the government is able to use of this tax fairly, then it will translate to a better quality of life and better services to the people within that locality. Next is income. If there is more income, it just means that there would be more capital for the future, investments to be done, and it will contribute to a better economic growth. Lastly is the production of jobs. When we develop a certain place into a tourism spot or a tourism attraction, we know it would generate a lot of employment opportunities from the low-skilled to high-skilled workers and to even corporate workers. Of course, jobs gives salaries, wages, and therefore it also increases the quality of life of the people who are engaged in the economic activity that surrounds tourism activities. And actually, all over the world, the United Nations World Tourism Organization has predicted and estimated that tourism has a contribution of $5 billion worth of economic gains worldwide.
The tourism industry generates substantial economic benefits to both host countries and tourist home countries, especially in developing countries. One of the primary motivations for a region to promote itself as a tourism destination is the expected economic improvement?
Tourism is one of the world's major economic sectors. It is the third largest export category after fuels and chemicals and in 2019 accounted for 7% of global trade. For some countries, it can represent over 20% of their GDP, and overall it is the third largest export sector of the global economy. Tourism supports 1 in 10 jobs and provides livelihoods for many millions more in both developing and developed economies. By studying tourism management, your chances of finding employment in this flourishing industry are very high. It's one of the fastest growing economic sectors in the world. It's also the main source of income for many countries, which means it's a branch of their economy. Tourism is one of the biggest sector of the services industry. Its size means that whether you choose to remain in the Philippines after your studies to work or you decide to relocate, there are established tourism employment opportunities in destinations as far as Australia, Africa, the Middle East, and more.
As we all know, tourism is vital for the success of many economies around the world. There are several benefits of tourism on host destinations. Tourism boosts the revenue of the economy, creates thousands of jobs, develops the infrastructures of a country, and plants a sense of cultural exchange between foreigners and citizens. The World Travel and Tourism Council's latest annual research shows that travel and tourism contribution to the world GDP outpaced the global economy for 7 consecutive years in 2017. In 2017, travel and tourism's direct, indirect, and induced impact accounted for is 8.3 trillion US dollar contribution to the world's GDP. The research shows that 2017 was a bomber year for the global travel and tourism sector, which grew at 4.6%, much faster than the economy as a whole. Its role as a driver of prosperity is clear, as the sector created 7 million jobs in 2017. Travel and tourism is a dynamic engine of economic development and job creation throughout the world. In 2017, travel and tourism directly contributed 2.6 trillion US dollar and nearly 119 million jobs worldwide. Taking its wider indirect and induced impacts into account, the sector contributed 8.3 trillion US dollar to the global economy and supported 313 million jobs in 2017. This was equal to 10.4% of the global or the world's GDP. Travel and tourism's impact includes people traveling for both leisure and business, domestically and internationally. In 2017, 77% or a total of 4.2 trillion US dollar of a travel spend was a result of leisure travel compared to 23% from business travel.
Tourism industry is one of the fastest growing industry in the world. It is also one of the most income generating industry, creating many job opportunities to the people around the world. Currency exchange, imports and taxes. With the growing numbers of tourists every day around the world, building and development involves a lot of initial and ongoing expenditures. Airports expanded and redeveloped, new roads were built, new destinations were discovered, foreign exchange was one of the main sources. These are
The economic contribution of tourism is felt in both direct and indirect ways, where the direct economic impacts of tourism are created when the commodities like accommodation, entertainment, food and beverage services, and retail opportunities are sold. So the residents, the visitors, the businesses, and various levels of governments all influences the direct economic impact of tourism through spending in or near in a given tourism area. So the key components of direct economic impacts of tourism is that they occur in within the country's borders and implemented by the residents or and non-residents for business and leisure purposes. So on the other hand, the indirect economic impacts of tourism can be found in investment spending surrounding a tourism offerings from private and governmental interests. So this investment may not explicitly be related to tourism, but it benefits the tourists and the local stakeholders all the same. So the indirect economic impacts of tourism are exemplified by the purchase and the sale of intermediary items like the additional supplies for restaurants during the tourism seasons. So indirect economic impacts accounts 50.7% of the total GDP contribution from the travel and tourism in 2014. Another is the circulation of the tourist dollar in a community is also an example of the indirect economic impacts of tourism. For example, the tourists inject money into the local economy when he or she buys a souvenir. So the tourist will spend their dollars to the local vendor, and the local vendor will spend it to the locality or their local community. So this is where the circulation happens.
In short, tourism is an example of economic policy pursued by governments because first, it brings in foreign exchange, second, it generates employment, and lastly, it creates economic activity.